Wallace and Ciara. Turn it up on 2FM.
Joining us from the Cork studio is Sexpert Beth Wallace. Beth, hi girl, how are you?
Hi guys, I'm good. How are you?
Good. Well, I'll tell you, we will see now how we are at the end of this, because this is heavy. Like, this is X-rated, I'll be honest with you. But it is also a very interesting conversation. Now, Beth comes on every now and then, and she chats with us about the more interesting sides of sexuality. You understand what I'm saying? Maybe the things that we don't always get to chat about and that aren't covered a lot in other mainstream media, as they might say. So, Beth, before we get down to it, what we're going to chat about tonight is female ejaculation.
Awesome. One of my favourite topics of conversation.
All right. Well, look, fair enough. That's a very good response. I'd say if you brought that up at most pub conversations in the country, you might not get Beth's emphatic response. But hey, Beth, that's why you're here.
Exactly. And I think, Chris, allow yourself a little bit of pure oil every now and again. It's very healthy.
Isn't it?
Well, it's definitely something that is discussed not as much as male ejaculation.
No.
So we're obsessed with ours. Do you know what I mean?
You are.
It's all about ours. But you see, here's the thing, Beth. Before we get down to it, it's female ejaculation, from my understanding, is also known as squirting.
Yes.
Okay.
Squirting, gushing. I suppose they'd be the two sort of most common slang terms for it, yeah.
Isn't it true as well? Because sometimes you see on the internet, you see all kinds of categories of porn. Am I right that in certain countries, it's illegal to make squirting porn?
I know, how ridiculous
Why
is that?
What's the reason behind it?
Well, it's illegal in the UK since last year, and the reason is just beyond ridiculous as far as I'm concerned. The British, I can't remember what the name of the board is called, but the sort of the
Film
British board
Yes,
film
exactly.
classification. Yeah.
Well done, Ciara. That's exactly who they are.
I've been onto them. Go on. Sorry.
Ciara had a range of DVDs that were banned last year, Beth, which is
So
very
believe you
interesting.
me, I know the
And
British
she's been
board
in
of film
negotiations.
classification.
Yeah,
Exactly.
she has. She's been trying to get the classification
Watch
lifted.
this space,
Yeah.
you guys. Anyway, sorry, Beth,
So,
continue.
yeah, so basically they, under quote-unquote medical advice, they don't believe that female ejaculation is anything other than urination. And so urination comes in under UK obscenity legislation. So it's illegal to film any acts or show the filming of any acts of urination. It's very controversial, I mean, there isn't solid scientific agreement in terms of A, what female ejaculation is, B, where it comes from, what the liquid is. I mean, there isn't even a name for the liquid.
Yeah, like as in when a man ejaculates, it's called ejaculate or semen or sperm or
and
whatever.
It's very well established.
And it's
as to
academic,
what's
of course.
in that.
They have it broken down by like what part of what is this, and like they have like it under microscopes, and you can look at it in lovely graphs and all that kind of stuff. But let me ask you that, because
Oh God, sorry, there's been so many studies about what men can actually eat so that the taste of their ejaculate,
exactly. I find
gets
that
better.
very interesting, that there has been really extensive studies of this aspect of male sexuality, and where is the comparable amount or depth of study in relation to female sexuality? It's simply not there.
Well, Beth, here's what I hear. And you can tell me if I'm right or wrong.
Sure, fire ahead.
Because I've heard a few different urologists or whatever. Because I mean, it is kind of one of these debates. Oh, is it a real thing?
Yeah,
a lot of people say it's urine. A lot of people say that you're provoking the bladder so much or whatever that you're causing it to basically. I won't say you're causing yourself to urinate on yourself, but that you are stimulating to the bladder to such an extent that it basically expels a bit of urine. But you'd be on the other side of thinking that this is a different thing, and that this is a woman articulating in the same way that a man does an orgasm by ejaculating a fluid.
There's a couple of points there that I sort of want to pick apart a little bit.
Oh, please do.
In terms of, it doesn't necessarily have to correlate with what would be mostly experienced as orgasm. It can be separate to, say, for example, a clitoral orgasm
So
or
you
a
can
vaginal
squirt without
orgasm.
You can squirt
Exactly.
without having an orgasm.
You can.
Sorry.
And
okay.
some people would call that an orgasm in and of itself, a G-spot
squirting.
orgasm, for
The
example.
act of squirting.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
They would call that a G-spot orgasm. And sometimes
What?
the
So that,
two-
hold on, sorry to keep interrupting. I'm like a kid now in school. So that's a G-spot orgasm.
Some people would refer to it as that, yeah.
When you squirt.
Yes.
Okay.
And it is a deeply pleasurable feeling. So in terms of the, is where I am on it, I mean, there's relatively, as I said earlier, there's very little study in relation to what it is, where it comes from, what it's all about. So basically a lot of my sort of opinion about it, a lot of my information about it is based on the personal experience of women who've done it, and also the listening to their partners listeners who've also experienced it, and to experienced sexologists and sexual experts, as opposed to the scientific community, because there simply isn't enough scientific information. So for the vast majority of women who ejaculate, it's not urine. I mean, simply by the fact of smelling it, you can tell the difference between urine and another bodily fluid.
Sure.
And in general, female ejaculate does not smell of urine. It smells of almost nothing. And when analysed, it's broken down into about 6 or 7 different component parts, and a very small part of that, for most women, is urine. Very small. The other 5 or 6 elements of it are various different hormones, urea, and there would be connections certainly with the bladder and the urethra, because it's all
connected anyway,
Exactly.
biologically.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
You can't separate the two.
Exactly. And in general, a G-spot or an ejaculation is linked to G-spot stimulation. And so the G-spot is about a couple of inches inside the vagina on the anterior wall, so like the front wall.
So you have to curve your finger back on itself.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
So that's very close to the bladder. And what you're doing is you're probably stimulating the bladder at the same time. And as you say, biologically, physiologically, all those bits and pieces are so close together that when you stimulate one, you're bound to stimulate others.
Beth, let me ask you this. Mm-hmm. And this is amazing because, as in, lads don't know this up until the age of about 15 or even older. Women, and this is not me trying to be funny, women urinate from a different part than, for example, you'd have vaginal intercourse with. Am I right?
Exactly. So the urethra is where urine comes from.
Which part is squirting? The part that I have the vaginal intercourse with, or the other part that I urinate from?
It's generally accepted that ejaculate comes from the paraurethral ducts. So they are sort of ducts or tubes that are in and around the urethral area. So technically, the sort of most anatomists or scientific sort of studies would show that it is coming from the urethral area as opposed to within the vagina.
Okay, so I'm not trying to break it down here too basically, but the urethra is the part that a lady would urinate from.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, all right.
And so I suppose it's a similar idea to, like, a man can't ejaculate and urinate at the same time.
That's why it's so painful for us afterwards. I can give you ladies a little perspective because, you see, sperm and urine don't interact well with each other.
No,
and urine
and
kills sperm. No, urine kills sperm. So that's why if you're having an orgasm, imagine there's 2 doors, right? There's the door that the sperm comes out of and there's the door that the urine comes out of. And when the door that the sperm comes out of is open, a bouncer kind of goes, all right, there's no urine getting out here.
Exactly.
And he seals everything off.
Isn't the human body amazing?
And then when you're urinating, the part where the sperm is has to close himself off.
Yes.
And be like, no one's getting in here for the duration of this pee.
Exactly.
Which is why it's so difficult for us sometimes to urinate after we've had sex.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
He doesn't know what it's supposed to be opening.
Yeah, exactly. And I suppose, interestingly, like, there's been some studies, it's a very small study, but there was one study done that had women empty their bladders prior to sexual stimulation. Then they ejaculated. So they had empty bladders prior to... Yeah, so empty bladders prior to sexual stimulation. Then they squirted, they ejaculated. And they still had empty bladders at the after sexual... Yeah.
It came from somewhere that wasn't the bladder.
Exactly. So, I mean, we scientifically, we simply do not know.
Okay, interesting.
Unfortunately.
Now, Beth, before you go, let me ask you this. Sorry, Ciara, you might have questions too.
No, I was just wondering, a lot of women wouldn't experience this type of ejaculation. How many are we talking about? What percentage-wise?
The studies really vary. Some studies say between 10% and 70%, which is an enormous difference.
That's not a very accurate percentage.
Very, very large percentage.
But the most recent study I've read talks about 40%. And I think there, in some circles there can be a little bit of competition around. Do you squirt? Do you ejaculate?
Yes, I do.
Oh, poor you. Yeah. You don't ejaculate. You're missing out.
As in, I'm a more evolved woman than you.
Well, exactly. There can be a little bit of that. And I think that anything that shames people about their sexual exploration or their sexual expression is not a good thing.
Do you think that just female bodies are differently made up?
Yes.
And some are going to ejaculate and some aren't?
Exactly. And some will find it easier and some won't. And certainly psychology plays an enormous part in that, in general, from anecdotal evidence, I would say that women who are more comfortable in their skin, who are more comfortable in terms of their sexuality and their sexual expression, and more relaxed during sexual play are much more likely to ejaculate than not.
Okay, interesting. So it's something that I take it the mood has to be right for, but in a lot of ways. Because in a man, like, let's be realistic, we're a very simple engine. As in, if you do enough things right a few times in a row, there's going to be an ejaculation.
Yeah.
But you're saying with a woman, it's a much more complex process. And there's some women that just can't even reach it at all.
Possibly. I mean, because of the lack of scientific evidence, we really don't know, but that's certainly how it seems. But I would say that it is possible to learn certain techniques that you can both give and receive in order to make it more likely.
Okay, well, look, Beth, I mean, this is awesome. I'm glad we had this chat. It's interesting, especially to talk to a lady like yourself about it. But don't forget, there is a bethwallace.org that you must check out. bethwallace.org. And there's all kinds of resources on there about all kinds of stuff like this that you might like to look more into.
Chris and Ciara. Turn it up on 2FM.